GOAT, a term that's become synonymous with excellent in practically anything today. Made up of these 4 letters. Greatest of all time. I've always felt fundamentally it's kind of impossible to have a greatest of all time, but for the relative sake of conversation, for the context of saying, because we live in eras that can be defined as moments in the evolution of culture, where we're able to look at the impact artists have made in their relative fields for as long as they've made it. We're able to look at people whose consistency has been longer than most, or consistency so endearing that we're forced to actually feel like, man, it feels like this person has been good forever. And it's this feeling that somebody has been good forever, even though we know they haven't. But it just feels like they've been good for as long as we've known them. They've been good for as long as we've been familiar with what they do. This is what I feel is at the crux of GOAT. The A in the GOAT is the real contention of the definition. Because obviously, you can't have somebody who's great for eternity. But I think as far as culture evolves, 2, 3, even 4 decades does count as a cultural eternity. It counts as a point where it's extremely fucking difficult, Bazalwane, to make an impact for more than 10 years in a culture which is increasingly becoming fast-paced, where what was 5 years, 10 years ago is 5 minutes today, where the shifting of the mediums and the technologies we use to measure impact and market people's overall just influence on culture is changing rapidly. Now, what's the point of having GOAT pieces if we can't have ideal GOATs? Because there are no ideals. Ideals are what we use to aspire. So these people who we present as maybe GOATs or are definitely GOATs are people who truly embody the ideals that we as the Headspace feel make up what South African hip-hop and hip-hop in general is all about. Enter the latest one, KHULI CHANA. Now, if you're South African, you know who this is. You hear the ringing of either Twak Stickum, Hapeli Hape, Freshe, Twada. KHULI CHANA is an overwhelmingly omnipresent artist in the South African pop culture sphere. And if that has anything to speak in terms of volumes of the artist's impact, it says that he has a general sense of popularity that arguably cannot be ignored. So let's go into the man's story. Khulani Morul is basically somebody who's born from that Maftown milieu of artists who were beginning to reinterpret their love for rap in ways that had more to do with how to bring it home. And this bringing it home mentality is something that's been very rare in the development of SA hip-hop in general, because we took it as a culture from the outside and we might have related to it according to the mirror experiences of blackness. For a lot of the early South African rap, hip-hop acts and practitioners, it was merely a reiteration of American culture. What we saw in POC was very reminiscent of Public Enemy, even though terms like Yetada grounded it back to where we are as a people. What we saw in the beginning evolution of how pop stars like Zwaibala and Bob Mabena were interpreting popular rap tropes is kind of this idea of let's take what's being done out there and formulaically adapt it to what works. And for the longest time it felt like real heads, when I say real heads I mean people who understand that above and beyond hip-hop traveling from the Americas through the experience of the oppressed and basically just interacting with us as an explosion of influence, there was a need to do something more than just appropriate. So when we talk about SA hip-hop, we're talking about hip-hop that has become undeniably South African in its own way. We're talking about graph artists who have been able to take styles that feed from the patterns and the glyphs of our own indigenous cultures. We're talking about DJs who do more and start to express the movement in how we understand music and breaking between these beats. We're talking about break dancers who understand how to interpolate panzula, manyisa, and all of these DNAs of rhythm that the African is so classically associated with within the context of the b-boy. So in other words, we're saying if hip-hop means remixing your past and empowering yourself by taking the best of where you come from, South Africans understanding the best of where they come from and putting it into the context of what this culture has done for us through its elements, bring about the best of what SA hip-hop has to offer. So KHULI CHANA coming from that kind of an understanding of artists who created a rapping style of their own, which was about taking the slang, taking the twang, taking the accents of our own unique surroundings and twisting it in a way that still had that boom bap punch, that still had that crunk effect, and eventually today comes to still have that trap factor, is what has set apart the imitators from the real great ones. And this path of the great ones, such as Jabba, such as Pro, such as Mandoza, who we've done GOAT pieces on, links in the description, can all be combined under this one banner of authenticity. Taking the influences of the world and finding a way to make them truly yours. So now I zoom back into this young man who's coming into this environment, rapping alongside his friends, his homies, talking about people like OKG, Omolemi, or Tody Mac, and they eventually form a crew called Ill Tribe. They are definitely in direct proximity to the now famed legend Double HP, who back then was an artist in his own right, trying to build a carving lane for rap which was distinct. I mean, the man called himself the hip-hop panzula. It doesn't get any more authentic than that, and I think it's this flavor that in this famed conversation that KHULI CHANA in one of his interviews lets us into, where he verbatim says that actually the term Murafe was an idea that hip-hop panzula had to create a kind of Maftown supergroup, which consisted out of artists who came from Mafikeng and were doing their thing, authentically expressing the language and aesthetic of the culture of the townships and the environments that Mafikeng had to offer. Artists like KB, artists like Stone from Bongo Mafi. Double HP's idea was the banner of Mafikeng truly becoming one united sphere of artists calling themselves Murafe. And KHULI openly says, we jacked the name. Because when Lanster came through and he saw the potential in the Ill Tribe, they thought to themselves, this idea of uniting not only the province but the country through authenticity is something we represent. Enter Murafe. Now at this point, we're going into 2005, which is their first album, which was, if I'm not mistaken,
Marwapula.
Is Marwapula or
Yeah.
is it Aine the Revelation?
No, Marwapula.
Marwapula was the
Yes.
first one. Marwapula, the anticipation. And from here, we basically get Josie Citylights, we get the whole thing.
Dula.
We get Dula. We get a range of music which shows that, okay, we've got artists who understand how to feed from the best of what has come. We've got the drum patterns that echo a kind of Kwaito-esque appeal. We've got songs that have that boom of a hip-hop reminiscence, but we've got an undeniably South African flair here. We've got cats who understand how to truly bring it home, and I think it was this moment that cemented Murafe as a movement of rappers now particularly who are trying to introduce South Africa to their own sense of authenticity. Mind you, 2005, 2006 is something we've always kind of locked into as the quote-unquote golden era of South African rap, because that's the moment where the industry started to respond to a bubbling demand of hearing rap interpreted ngendlela yethu. It was no longer Asimo States Mong, because there was a kind of a realization that there are people who understand the messaging behind that, who understand that the best way to represent hip-hop is by representing themselves and the cultures that they come from and imbibing it in one thing that just makes cohesive sense. So at this point, the greatest artists who we now regard as OG come from this 2005, 2006 era, which definitely can be called golden because of how it gave us an elite group of people, including KHULI CHANA, who were able to this time make a name for themselves in a way that the general South African populace, not just hip-hop heads, not just the cypher, not just the breakers, not just the graffiti artists, but the kids were able to kind of interact with this new sound in a way that they could truly respond to it because it spoke to the story of the general South African experience. Now, if you've been following the channel, you know that we have something called the 5 principles. The 5 principles are basically our measurement of excellence in terms of hip-hop mastery, in terms of how all the aspects, not just rap, all the aspects of the culture can be measured in terms of who has done the most. Now, it focuses a lot on music though, because you know, we fundamentally focus on rap music as it has been a powerful aspect of growing the hip-hop culture. So, if I'm going to judge KHULI CHANA according to anything, it's going to be that. So, what I found is, original for days, technicality is on point. I mean, come on. One of the things about KHULI is that he's one of those artists who has this rare ability to be able to stay so complex in his nuances and how he structures his rhymes. He's definitely not somebody whose songwriting is made to be minimal or simple. He's somebody who definitely wants to go bar for bar and show himself as a lyricist, but he's got a beautiful way to make it flexible and catchy and just snazzy and like infectious. How, you know, that whole low tone flex voice that he has that resonates and always kind of wears itself in cool, doesn't become a gimmick, because as much as he's represented himself as this kind of Mr. Cool, Mutswako originator, center of all things fly, there's a human element in KHULI's music that's undeniable. There's pain, there's tragedy, there's triumph, there's stories, there's anecdotal projects building the human experience. So as a result, it's no wonder that when he dropped Mutswako Originator, it became a sensation. It became something that brands could align themselves to. Adverts could play a lot of the songs from it. KHULI became a celebrity because a lot of his music fed from the beautiful history of what South Africa has to offer. And it comes into something as simple as knowing our humor, knowing our pain, knowing our sports, knowing our fashion, and be able to take all of these references, knowing our foods. And if anything, rap music has become a conveyor of culture through reference. We know what a dime piece is because we heard rappers talking about it. We know what capping is because we understand and hear rappers talk about it in the context of their cultures. And even in the same context, if KHULI CHANA is able to rap about this part, if he's able to say happily happy, if he's able to use phrases, objects, subjective experiences which are specific to this country and still be able to do it in a way that feels so globally hip-hop, what more do you want from a GOAT? Because again, originality, technicality, which is what I was focusing about, his emotional depth, which I mentioned, his mass appeal, which eventually became a part of this rolling sensation that his music became because it was just so accessible to our culture. Coming to the 5th principle, consistency. Now, all of our GOATs in the past have had this key element, and I'd go as far as saying it might just be the most important element of the GOAT. In the beginning, I said it is the A in the GOAT that is most contentious. It's the length of an artist's impact that we're able to feel that, my God, they've been good for a while now. They have been at the height of their particular niche and context and have been doing it in a way that's been consistent. Coming into consistency. Has KHULI CHANA been consistent? Now let's zoom into his music again. So he evolves from Murafe. They give us the first offering, which, as we said, was Marua Pula, the anticipation. They come through again, giving us Aine, the revelation. Mind you, this was supposed to be a trilogy, and I'm going back and I'm saying, now that Toady Mac has settled and become a legend, a teacher, and a talking head of hip-hop respected amongst his circles, now that KG is the sole crooner of note who's breeded old and young artists and given them hooks and creative direction for days, now that KHULI CHANA is the established hip-hop entrepreneur culture figure and general South African icon. Now that Mr. Momulemi has been able to show people that you can contribute to hip-hop and still be able to kind of wangle real-life community-based projects, and him being a literal farmer and showing us that it's all one and the same thing, whether you're preaching hip-hop on the mic, hip-hop on the dance floor, or just hip-hop on the freaking land you live on. It's all part of being able to reinvent that seed and making it grow further. Now that all these individuals are showing us excellence in all their fields, I think another Morave project would make sense right now. But back to KHULI CHANA, this legacy propels him to the rest of the group, saying to him, bro, we think you need to go solo. And this is the important and really interesting thing about KHULI CHANA's career that I found interesting. He didn't choose going solo. He, in many instances, is quoted as saying, it wasn't me. I saw myself as the low-key, kind of injected in the silence of the background type. But it was the rest of the members who felt like he was the one worthy to carry the Mutswako Peyton as it was growing through artists like Jabba, and also the vision of what Murafe was in the beginning as something which would represent the whole of Maftown. And I think Tody Mac, KG, Mulemi all saw something in KHULI CHANA that we've come to see now. Somebody who represents the most coolest aspects of South Africa. And when I say cool, you know, the term is synonymized with being in fashion. But really, when you look at the roots of what cool is, it's that breeze, it's that currency, it's that wave that's able to push itself throughout times because it's grounded on the very wind that we all breathe on. KHULI CHANA is an artist who is grounded in a very indigenous spirit and understands how to navigate through the landscapes of culture as they change. I'm not getting emotional, I promise. I'm just putting something out of my eye. But I might as well be. Because when we preach authenticity, this is somebody who has done it and has been able to navigate themselves and grow through it. So if we're looking at the Murafe catalog, if we're looking at Mutswako Originator, which basically gave us the bulk of the hits, and Lost in Time, which was basically the anthemic note of Swada, which, mind you, as a moment, got me interested in how a boom bap joint can have the whole of South Africa going crazy, because the subject matter appealed to the people. He didn't need to pander to any kind of instrumental sounds which we would have done in the past, although that might have most likely worked. He took a beat that was so classically global hip-hop, the most New York, Timberland wearing boot beat you could ever imagine.
Yeah.
And he made it South African. This is why we respect KHULI CHANA. But after that 2009 to 2013 kind of moment, where even in his personal life something very interesting happened, where KHULI CHANA was shot. He was shot by the cops because they mistook him for a criminal allegedly. And I know most rappers want to get shot because they feel it's good for the publicity, but the man almost died because of a mistake done by people whose responsibility it is to really find the culprits. But above and beyond judgment and analysis of the whole case and what it was about, and the fact that KHULI CHANA got a cool alleged 1.8 million from it, which is how you win, KHULI CHANA had that moment for him represent something that I think a lot of rappers aspire to. When you become so much of a cult figure that any event in your life becomes mythology, and you could literally be having a divorce and it will become something people want to know about. You could be starting a new business, and for him it happened to be almost dying, and this moment of existential shock became his kind of reinvention into the future. I could imagine when you almost use your life, you think about your future. And when you get a cool lump sum of money from people who almost killed you, it gives you enough of an incentive and a starting point to start planning for that future. So here goes the next chapter of KHULI CHANA, which was really becoming KHULI CHANA the entrepreneur, the rap-trepreneur, the hip-hop-trepreneur, who gave us the best aspects of what we love from SA hip-hop. Maftown Heights as a festival, giving itself to artists that were growing and developing. We're talking about the Caspers to the Maklera Dope Boys. We're talking about the 25Ks. We're talking about a tradition of expressing the best of what hip-hop has to offer in terms of rap and DJing, spearheaded by KHULI CHANA and his partners. Also, Absolute, one of the biggest alcohol brands around, literally headhunting the man to become a Pan-African face for an alcohol brand, granted, but an alcohol brand which sought to bring capital to Africa as an image of futuristic capital growth. And if that has anything to speak on, KHULI Chana's aesthetic and whole being was bankable because of his authenticity. He was able to set the trend by not trying to be American, by actually taking the best of what his culture had to offer and doing numbers that even AKA wanted. So ultimately, the legacy of KHULI Chana is showing us that what we have is important enough and powerful enough to go global. But at this point, in the booming of the business, the music began to slide down. The changing of the guards, the shifting of the sonic scope of hip-hop and rap music in general kind of left KHULI Chana in a kind of limbo place where even the album created through that Absolute Vodka deal, One Sorts, which was basically kind of an all-African coming together of expression through rap music and pop culture, Planet of the Have-Nots, which was kind of a reiteration of KHULI trying to transcend the country, but starting with the continent. All didn't quite sink in because KHULI's resistance to try to pander to anything that doesn't immediately speak to him is admirable. Most artists would jump on any wave which they feel is money worthy, but not KHULI Chana. KHULI Chana sticks to that same formula that he understands, and he grows from that. And I think through him becoming a businessman, he's eventually gravitated away from being in touch with the musical sphere because he's a grown man. But it hasn't stopped him from contributing to the evolution of young artists, coming to the last principle. He's got one good album. And is that enough to mark consistency? Is his lack of musical consistency a reflection of why he couldn't be a GOAT? Or is this concept of consistency something we need to go beyond the actual music? Because if we're talking hip-hop and not just rap, we're talking somebody who contributes to the culture at large. And be it Maftown Heights, be it making hip-hop more accessible to commercial brands, be it becoming somebody who could go from being on a KFC advert to being on your favorite auntie's TV show, KHULI Chana has been able to bring South Africa together and create more interest around this interesting thing we love called hip-hop, and to be consistent with. So as a result, there's only one ultimate question. Does the consistency stretch beyond the music? Because if it does, then we gotta give it to him. Then he's got all 5 principles. Then he's gone from just being a rapper to being beyond rap, to actually just being hip-hop. Being hip-hop in representing the entrepreneurial aspect of growing the culture, of giving other artists the chance, of remixing the past in ways that revolutionize the present moment and give more possibility to the future. But if what we mean by GOAT is somebody who's had the most musical impact, then perhaps he isn't. Perhaps Motswako Originator and a couple of good songs from Lost in Time and all the subsequent projects aren't enough to entrench KHULI Chana's catalog as one of South Africa's mainstay artists. But this is the interesting question. Talk to me about it in the comment section. Do you think GOAT as a term within rap music is something that should be relegated just within the music? Or can what rappers do outside of the music in consistency be added as part of the dimension of their legacy? Are we going to say 50 Cent is still relevant because of how he's made hip-hop relevant in movies? Are we going to say an artist like Nick Cannon is relevant because of what he's done in introducing hip-hop in terms of the context of humor and comedy, and by basically boosting aspects like battle rap through his show Wild 'N Out? Are we going to now say if an artist is able to start from the music and grow to develop all these other aspects of hip-hop, that's what ultimately matters? And are those who don't do that suddenly not GOATs anymore? These are the questions. Because one thing's for sure, with everything that I've just mentioned, with the developing in South Africa's golden era through one of the most tightened groups that we've ever had, through now fixturing himself as a solo act that has basically defined a lot of the slang and lingo and ways in which South African artists approach rap music. An OG evolving into somebody who is a mentor for younger artists to understand how to translate and transition and transcend out of the music in ways that are successful, leaving a lasting legacy into what he recently did this year, showing us a little bit of his vision through something called KHULI CHANA Studios, which is basically a creative hub helping artists get facilities for the things that they need, such as spaces to shoot, spaces to record, a basic media hub. Seems to be the next step in KHULI CHANA's direction. All speaking to this question that I'm asking. Are you simply a GOAT in the measure you're able to do in your lane? Or is what you do as you grow out of that and contribute to other aspects an important part of that legacy? Should we be talking about more than just music when we talk about GOATs? Should we be talking about the impact that they make on a social level? Talk to me on the comments section, because if that's the case, then KHULI CHANA is the GOAT. But just from everything that's been mentioned, we can clearly say that he might be the GOAT. That he strongly could be the GOAT. That he very may as well be the GOAT. But the ultimate affirmation of that is something I'm giving to you, the headspaces, because like I said, this is an ongoing conversation. And the A in GOAT is something we all subjectively feel in different ways. Talk to me. Do you feel VJ, the music hasn't been consistent enough for us to consider him a GOAT in the long run? Or no, we're talking hip-hop here, not just rap. So the contribution that the man has made to hip-hop as a whole and the culture is enough to consistently be able to give him the mantle of GOAT. I'm VJ, the brother from the ancient mother, and this is a very fascinating question that I need you to answer. Shout out to KHULI CHANA for being part of the culture, for showing us greatness in many aspects. Keep doing your thing. Much love.